Dr. Atkinson is an associate professor of history and Asian American studies at Purdue University. He is also the director of graduate education. He is originally from Leeds, Great Britain. He received his PhD from Boston University. Dr. Atkinson specializes in American foreign relations and migration, international history, American and British imperial history, and he is a local expert on the alt-right and has spoken frequently throughout the community to educate us on the alt-right, their tactics, history, and goals. He spoke at the first Resistance Fair in 2017. If you go on our website, you can find the links and you can watch him present back in 2017. 2 years later, a lot has happened, so we thought it was a good time for the community to get an update on what's going on with alt-right. So with that, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, thanks for coming, especially on a day like this and weather like this, on a topic like this, no less. No good news today. So I started doing this, as Lisa said, I'm a professor of history, and I'm a professor of migration history and imperial history especially. And I wrote a book a few years ago called The Burden of White Supremacy, Containing Asian Migration in the British Empire and the United States. And it was about how places like Australia and New Zealand and South Africa and Canada and the United States all prevented the immigration of South Asian and East Asian immigrants at the turn of the 19th, early 20th century. All of these places put in place regulations that prohibited the immigration of non-white immigrants in one form or another. So I've been thinking about the historical nature of white supremacy for a long time. And then in 2016, right after the election, I noticed, as everybody else did, the kind of emergence of this new white supremacist movement, the alt-right. And of course, my interest was piqued as yours was, no doubt, and I sought to understand it, which meant spending a lot of time reading, as I had in historical sources, contemporary sources about the alt-right. And that meant spending a lot of time on nasty Twitter pages and 4chan and 8chan and everywhere else you can think where these people lurk. And I really wanted to understand how it related to previous iterations of white supremacy that I'd studied in the historical context, but also what it meant for contemporary politics, because I could see it was clearly related to what was going on in 2016. And so the first time I ever spoke about the alt-right was at an event just like this. It was the Who's Left event. Remember that in 2016? Was anyone there? There was hundreds of people showed up for all kinds of talks, right? It was just an incredibly generative moment, right? Where people were trying to make sense of what had happened. And in the next year, for 2017, I gave talks on the alt-right about 16 times around the community. It was more than one a month. People were asking me to come and help us understand what this group is about. And so for those of you who never heard me bang on about that, this is the synopsis of the talks I was giving in 2017, right? Trying to help people understand what I thought were the central tenets underlying the alt-right's ideology. And I do think it has an ideology. And it's really these 7 things that I and others have kind of divined from that morass of nonsense that goes on 4chan and 8chan. I mean, what do they really want? What do they really think? What are they really after? What are they trying to talk about? 4chan, don't even go on there, Greg. It's a website, yes, and it's a social media site, yeah, where a lot of white supremacists hang out. The 8chan's even worse. So what's at the heart of this, I think, is this commitment to some really traditional white power ideology, some traditional neo-Nazi ideology, which is the 14 words and the JQ. The 14 words is this: we must secure the existence of our race and a future for white children. Those are the 14 words that have been at the center of all white power, neo-Nazi, white supremacist movements in the United States since at least the 1980s. You'll often see a lot of references to 1488ers if you spend a lot of time in this community. The 14 of 1488ers is that 14 words, which basically means, we've got to protect white people and we've got to protect white children, essentially. Those words were first iterated by David Lane, who's a convicted murderer, who wrote a white supremacist manifesto in prison while serving a life sentence for the murder of a Jewish DJ down in Colorado. And he put out this screed about what modern neo-Nazism should look like. And at the heart of it, what everyone in the movement took from it was those 14 words, right? And that became a shorthand. The 18-8 is HH, the eighth letter of the alphabet twice, right? Heil Hitler. So 14 aviators use that as a shorthand to identify to one another that they are in fact neo-Nazis. So the 14 words is at the heart of neo-Nazism, it's at the heart of post-war white supremacism, and I think very clearly it's at the heart of the alt-right. They've made a really strong effort to pretend that this is not white power neo-Nazi movement. And they've dressed it up, literally in the case of Richard Spencer's tweed suits, but they've tried to intellectualize and philosophize away the fact that this is traditional white supremacist thinking. And you see this reference to the 14 words in the alt-right all the time. I mean, this is a tweet I have to say from December 2016 from a group called American Vanguard, which was one of the alt-right groups that was active after the election. And this was a tweet where they basically said to the public, there are some things we must never compromise on, the 14 words, and the JQ, which is the Jewish question, are central to our ideology. The alt-right has always been WN white nationalist, right? You couldn't have a clearer statement of neo-Nazism than that. The JQ, the Jewish question, is another shorthand for basically the idea that there is a vast Jewish conspiracy that is pulling the strings in media and government and economy and basically controlling the world.
Does that have anything to do with the deep state?
It's not unrelated.
You'd think so.
Yeah, it certainly is. And what's so interesting about that, of course, is that's also so obviously at the heart of all post-war neo-Nazism, right? Deriving directly from Nazism itself. So again, I think they spent a lot of time pretending that they weren't neo-Nazis, but you couldn't have a clearer connection to the fact that at heart the ideology is neo-Nazism. It's just dressed up, basically. Another key concept that I think you've got to understand about these groups, or something they talk about, refer to all the time, is the idea of white genocide or white erasure, right? The idea that the white race is under threat of complete annihilation by non-white groups, immigration, by a Jewish conspiracy, the Zionist occupationist government, or ZOG as they call it, right? Wherever you want to look, there is a conspiracy afoot, led by liberals like you, by the way, to basically eradicate the white race. And that you see all kinds of different iterations of this among alt-right and neo-Nazis. They see immigration policy as an effort to dilute the white race in white countries. They see abortion as an effort by a Zionist conspiracy to basically stop the birth of white children. Homosexual rights is another evidence of a vast liberal conspiracy to basically undermine the production of white bodies, right? And so on and so forth. Everywhere you look, it's there. And again, I think these kinds of posters and phrases, you'll see a commonplace where white supremacists and alt-right affiliates hang out. So again, I think these two things are absolutely at the heart of it, and it really puts it squarely in the tradition of what neo-Nazism and white power politics since the post-war. They'll dress it up. They dress it up as white nationalism, that this is some new, I'll talk a little bit more about this later because it's at the center of everything. They'll talk about a white ethno-state, that what they really want to achieve is a new homeland for the white races, the white European races in North America or elsewhere, depending on where you are. This is basically racial segregation at its heart. They draw a lot of sustenance from a European philosophical white supremacism known as identitarianism. That really puts, again, kind of white ethnicity at the heart, but also roots it in kind of blood and soil nationalism, right? That there is a Germanic people, and the Germanic people of Europe need a Germanic homeland that is made up of people just from that ethnicity. The same goes for Hungarians, same goes for, whoever it might be, Brits, whatever. They also talk a lot about race realism. Race realism is the idea that race is a real biological fact. Scholars have spent decades pointing out that it's a social, economic, political, and cultural construction, right? Skin color might be different, but everything else that people have associated with that throughout history is made up. We invented it, right? We attributed, superior and inferiorities to races because it suited our politics, our culture, whatever it might be, our economic inheritance, right? But what the alt-right wants us to believe is that race is real and race explains difference. It explains biological differences. That some people are inferior and some people are superior. And there's nothing you can do about it. It's biology, right? The same goes for what they call gender realism. We've spent a lot of time unpacking the fact that gender is also a social, cultural, political, economic construct. The alt-right believes that's nonsense, that gender differences are biological and real, and that we need to structure policies around those realities, right? And it's a deeply misogynistic endeavor, the alt-right, deeply misogynistic. A lot of it's rooted in a hatred of feminism, in a hatred of women's rights, and going even deeper in some of the more dark corners of this stuff. Basically, the men cannot actuate themselves because women won't let them, right? Whether it's sexually, politically, economically, or whatever. Right? So there's some dark stuff going on. So anyway, this is what I would spend an hour talking about every month in 2017. I really wanted to sound the alarm that the alt-right was real. Your kids, your brothers, your dads, your uncles, whoever they are, who were spending time online in these communities were exposed to these ideas. And they were couched, they were hidden quite often, but they were at the heart of it. Once you got in, this is what they present you with, right? And I wanted to make that clear to people, as did many others. And then people stopped calling me, right? After August 2017, the calls to speak dried up. I think I gave maybe 3 presentations about Charlottesville after Charlottesville. Because the Unite the Right rally, which you'll all remember no doubt, at UVA in Charlottesville, Virginia, was an absolute disaster for the alt-right. It was catastrophic for all intents and purposes. Because what happened is, these guys, who you see on this picture, were so full of hubris and so full of confidence and arrogance that this moment had arrived where Americans were ready to confront the real truth, right, about themselves, which is that the white race is ready to be superior and all the rest of it. They went out and marched, right? And they went out and took their tiki torches from Home Depot and they marched around and they chanted, "You will not replace us, Jews will not replace us," and they chanted blood and soil, this Nazi nationalist slogan. They wore no masks, right? They filmed it, they were proud, and they really, I think, believed that the country was ready to embrace this fact of race realism. And then what happens, of course, is everyone says, "What the hell is going on here?" Right? All of a sudden, everyone's like, "Look at these guys." It weren't just these alt-right guys, right, from the internet that showed up. There were people in clan hoods, there were KKK members, there were traditional 1488 white power people showing up, tattoos, rifles, skinheads, swastikas, right? The whole gamut of the white supremacist right showed up and marched together with all these middle-class white boys from the internet, right? And all of a sudden, the hoods are off. The hood's off, right? And that's it. And it really, we came face to face with the kids on the internet here in real life. And it was disastrous for them. It was a massive disaster because, we all got to see face to face what they thought, what they believed, and what they wanted to achieve. And of course, they killed somebody, right? I mean, Heather Heyer's murder at Charlottesville brought home to everybody just how dangerous this was. This isn't just basement-dwelling, Cheeto-eating internet dwellers, These are tech workers, they're lawyers in some cases. This is a very middle-class endeavor. And they actually killed somebody. So this is real. This isn't just an internet thing. Became clear. So I think in a lot of ways, Charlottesville was a strategic catastrophe for the alt-right. An alt-right that felt it had reached its moment of coming out. This was in some respects a kind of white supremacist debutante's ball, right? A cotillion for these guys. And it was a mess. It was a mess. So what it did was three things that I think show great possibility for undermining this movement. A movement that looked like it was nothing but growing, right, before Charlottesville in 2017. For one thing, intentionally, and in some cases unintentionally, it showed their faces to the world, what the community calls doxed. It doxed them, right? They got doxed, and this is about documentation, right? So when you go on the internet on Twitter anonymously and make all kinds of claims and statements, there's always somebody who can figure out who you are, right? And they can find your address, your employer, they can find your picture, they can find your family, they can find your telephone number. They can do this in a matter of minutes. That's called doxing, right? And they'll make that public so that you'll lose your job, so that you'll lose your support of your family, etc., etc. Or we'll just set 100 of these goons on you to hang around your house for a week and drive you nuts, right? So this was an intentional and unintentional, because a lot of these guys didn't want to get doxed, but for one reason or another, the police finally took notice, especially when they were beating guys up in the street with bats and what have you. So a lot of these people got outed, they got doxed. And again, I think a lot of this was hubris, the real arrogance, that there'd be no consequences, and then there was. And it really brought home what this was doing. At the same time, it led to a lot of what's called deplatforming, taking away the platforms that these people have online, especially. I'll talk more about a couple of examples of that in a minute. But this was a really successful strategy that a lot of left-wing activists pursued and moderate activists pursued to try and take these people out of the public eye and remove their very lucrative platforms of one kind or another. And I'll show you some of those in a minute. I'll give you an example of that. That was a really strong piece of activism, a really good way of dealing with these guys. In the aftermath of Charlottesville, the alt-right, especially the leaders of the original alt-right, people like Richard Spencer and Jason Kessler and folks like that, they spent a lot of time trying to figure out what to do next. How are we going to rebuild from this? What are we going to do to overcome this catastrophe? And they tried a number of different strategies, a number of different efforts to create spectacle and kind of revive themselves. And all of them were a mess. They failed. And I'll show you a couple of examples of that in a minute too. And they failed in large part because of opposition from activists like you. It really was a concerted effort by people who finally, after Charlottesville, everyone's aware of who these guys are, and all of a sudden people are mobilizing to respond. So this was really important too. At the same time, what really dragged the alt-right down after Charlottesville was also the fact that they argue with each other about everything, right? These are people whose ideas are almost entirely inventions of their imagination. And they all have very committed thoughts about every little aspect of it. So they spend a ton of time arguing with each other about what the right strategy is, what the right claim is, what the right purpose is, what the right and they just explode around that. I'll show you examples again in a minute. So in a lot of ways, Charlottesville, I think, was a catastrophe. This is James Alex Fields, the guy who murdered Heather Heyer, who ran over her in his car. He was a member of a group called Identity Europa, which was a very active, before Charlottesville, alt-right group that was really doing a lot of canvassing on college campuses, including Purdue, and trying to build up a following. And a lot of these guys that affiliated with Identity Europa showed up at Charlottesville, including James Alex Fields. Again, he's the one who was driving the car that murdered Heather Heyer at Charlottesville. He was charged with federal hate crime, 29 federal hate crime charges, which he pled to avoid the death penalty. Shortly after that, he was found guilty of murder on a state level in Virginia law. So he's serving consecutive life sentences right now. The guy's never getting out of prison. And this is indicative of a reality that came crashing home to these alt-right activists, that their stakes were very, very real here. Identity Europa essentially collapsed immediately. This had been, again, one of the most prominent groups online, and all of a sudden it was gone, because the reality of this thing was staring them in the face. Another good example of kind of what happens when you come out as alt-right, if you will, is Christopher Cantwell. If you've ever seen the footage of UVA that Vice did on HBO, he's at the heart of it, Cantwell. He's this aggressive, skin-headed guy who's all full of vim and vigor and is carrying a rifle around and a handgun around, ginning everybody up. Jews will not replace us, right? Cantwell was at the heart of that. He was basically arrested not long after on assault and battery charges for pepper spraying some Antifa guys. He was banned from Virginia for 5 years. He did a tearful. They now call him the crying Nazi because he did a tearful YouTube video, saying my life is ruined. Look what these people have done to me. All I was trying to do was protect the white race, and now I've lost my job. I've lost everything. Right? He was banned from every social media site where he had a presence: Facebook, Instagram, PayPal, Venmo, Twitter, you name it. He was deplatformed, as they called it. And this is tremendously effective. It just denuded this guy's reach entirely and reduced him literally to tears online. This was very, very effective. So doxing and deplatforming are two strategies that in the aftermath of Charlottesville were enormously effective. A lot of people don't like it for one reason or another. It's not nice to have to out someone and have them lose their job, but what these people are doing is not nice. And I think we deserve to know who they are. Deplatforming, of course, has come with all kinds of free speech arguments that you can't deny people a platform, but guess what? The First Amendment doesn't apply to Twitter, right? It's a private corporation. The First Amendment is guaranteed by the government, not by Twitter. So yes, you can take people off Twitter, you can take people off PayPal, you can take people off YouTube, and they did in the aftermath of Charlottesville. And it just cut the legs off these groups. It's as simple as that. It drove them even deeper underground into again, rather than 4chan, 8chan, and on from Twitter to Gab, which was where a lot of these people went as an alternative when they were deplatformed on Twitter, and so on. But it drives them further and further away from your kids, right? Which is good. So doxing and deplatforming in the aftermath of Charlottesville proved to be very effective in just cutting the legs out from under these guys. And everywhere you look in the aftermath of Charlottesville, some of the key figures who've been at the heart of the alt-right since 2015 and 2014 were succumbing to basically doxing and deplatforming. One of the biggest mouths of the alt-right and then the alt-light, as it comes to be known afterwards, is Milo Yiannopoulos. Some of you may be fortunate enough to not even know who he is anymore. You couldn't avoid him 2 years ago. He was everywhere. And he's basically banned. He's one of the first people actually to be deplatformed from Twitter when he went after the actress Leslie Groves. When they did the Ghostbusters reboot, the female lead Ghostbusters reboot, he led this army of trolls against the one black actress in the movie, Leslie Groves. Joe, thank you. I always do that. Leslie Groves is the guy who ran the Manhattan Project. I always do that. So my apologies, Leslie. Anyway, he's eventually banned from Twitter. One of the earliest examples of Twitter actually banning a prominent, verified member. Milo's deplatformed. He becomes the poster child for deplatforming. He's kicked off every platform and social media. He's currently about $2 million in debt. He is basically crying into the wilderness at the moment. No one can follow him, listen to him. He is responsible for outing Richard Spencer a couple of days ago. I'll show you that in a minute in case you missed it. Apologies in advance. But yeah, well, you're in for a treat. So again, Milo is now just a lost cause. I mean, this guy was at the heart of the whole thing, and now he's,
Was he arrested as a child molester?
That was another part of it. He had talked in glowing terms or slightly glowing terms about paedophilia. He lost his book contract with Simon & Schuster over that. A book contract he never should have got in the first place. But again, that's indicative of the deplatforming that happens, right? Take away his book contract, take away Twitter, take away YouTube, ban him from Facebook. Facebook rarely bans anyone, and they banned Milo. So again, it worked. The Daily Stormer is another key neo-Nazi white supremacist website run by Andrew Anglin. That has been deplatformed so many times I don't even know where it is anymore, and no one else does either. Anglin's gone all over the world trying to get this website hosted, but his web hosters keep kicking him off and moving, and he keeps moving around the world to avoid arrest. So again, it's just constantly on and offline, is Daily Stormer, and it's a rancid website. And you know, as of yesterday, it was online, but we'll see. Again, the Proud Boys, which was one of these kind of alt-light groups. Alt-light being the idea that these groups were not as focused on racialism and racism as the alt-right. They still wanted to see a reduction in migration. They still wanted to see limitations on all kinds of liberal agenda items, but weren't quite as focused on the Jewish conspiracy as the alt-right was. But even these guys succumbed in many cases to deplatforming in the summer of 2018. Gab, which is where a lot of the Twitter white supremacists went when they were deplatformed on Twitter. That was shut down briefly after the Tree of Life massacre in Pittsburgh, at the synagogue in Pittsburgh in October 2018. 4chan, 8chan get periodically deplatformed. But the best example in my view of this is what Richard Spencer tried to do after Charlottesville. Spencer, you know, was the poster child for the alt-right, right? You've all seen him, great haircut, tweed suits, right? Intelligent sounding, intellectual sounding guy. He was the public face of the alt-right for a long time. After Charlottesville, he tried to do a college tour because he knew that he couldn't be banned from public college campuses, because that is a First Amendment issue, because these are state schools. So he knew that he could always challenge any group that tried to ban him from presenting his case at, for instance, Ohio State or University of Florida or University of Alabama, all places he spoke in the aftermath. But what happened is, when he showed up at these places, he was met with massive resistance, essentially, by college students and others who showed up to shout him down, to use what is known as the heckler's veto. You have the right to say whatever you want, but we don't have to listen to it, right? So they shouted him down. Again, this is something that a lot of people don't like. Free speech is perfect and unquestionable. But it worked. It really did work. And Spencer abandons that tour almost as soon as it begins, and basically says, that too many people were showing up. We were getting, guys were showing up to support him too, right? And they were getting in fights outside the venues. And, this was not fun for him, he said. Unless it changes, we are up a creek without a paddle. Antifa is winning. They're exercising the heckler's veto, and he cancelled it. I followed this very, very closely, him and his lawyer, through this whole college tour, because I was convinced that we'd be a good candidate at Purdue for him to show up, given Purdue's commitment to the free speech principles, the FIRE principles of the University of Chicago. But he was just exhausted 3 weeks in at the level of opposition he faced everywhere he went, and just petered out. And that was his great kind of next step. So again, doxing, deplatforming, those things worked, and the heckler's veto worked. Again, whatever you think about this, it worked. Another evidence of just what massive resistance, and I'm using massive resistance intentionally, historically that's the term that segregationists used to defend segregation in the South in the 50s and 60s. And I think we've seen an opposite inflection of that by activists on the left against the alt-right lately. So I don't know if you remember this, but a couple of weeks after Charlottesville, there was an already scheduled free speech rally that was supposed to take place on Boston Common. Oops. While I do that,
let's check.
Is it
I pressed something here. No, I got it. Oh, you got it.
I'm gonna so.
I think I'm going to trip. There's all sitting right here. This was supposed to be the next big debutante ball for the alt-right, but it started to talk in terms of free speech, right? Because they recognized that was a winning platform. You can't argue with free speech, right? So about 100 to 200 pro-alt-right, alt-light, you name it, groups, few white power kind of traditionalists showed up in Boston on the Common, and about 30 to 40,000 people marched through the streets of Boston in opposition. Right? This was overwhelming. This was a huge statement by the people of Boston that you're not welcome here, and your message is not welcome here. And that was powerful. That really took the air right out of the tires on whatever was left of the alt-right publicly after Charlottesville. It really was a powerful statement and indicative of what can be done when people get together and say no, right? And that was simple as that. So I think these are great stories of triumph for the good guys, I think, here. And some of the strategies they used to do that, to really deflate the alt-right in the aftermath of Charlottesville, again, which dealt a pretty devastating blow to the movement anyway. And the other big thing that was really undermining the alt-right after Charlottesville was the numerous schisms and debates and arguments that were going on inside the very broad tent of the alt-right, right? I mean, this is just a group of people that are feeding on each other's anxieties and antagonisms and fears, and they're doing it based on their reading, and in some cases invention of all kinds of pseudo-scientific, pseudo-moralistic, pseudo-intellectual theories. You put all that in an internet box, and you've got a million people who don't disagree on one single thing, right? You've all been there. You're all engaged people, right? I like to say in faculty meetings, you put 30 faculty members in a room, you'll have 180 different opinions. So again, this is what it's like for these guys too, and it works. So debates over strategy and tactics, debates over the efficacy of putting racialism at the foreground, right? Putting ideas about race and protecting the white race at the foreground are really at the heart of debates between the alt-right and what came to be known derisively within the community as alt-light. Support for Trump was a big deal. A lot of people vacillated on whether Trump was the right vessel, after all, for these ideas. Early on in 2016, that was the idea. This guy is enunciating and articulating our ideology for us. A year or two later, there was still no wall. The bans were up in court. The Muslim ban was up in court. It didn't seem to be going very far. And so there were a lot of debates over how committed Trump might or might not be. And they were arguing about, should we support him or should we support other movements? There's a lot of feeling that the conservatives in the Republican Party, which might be natural allies in some respects for the alt-right, weren't really committed enough, weren't really ready to get down in the weeds with race and racism, weren't ready to commit to a complete ban on immigration, weren't ready to roll back gay marriage, weren't ready to commit to all these things the alt-right wanted to see. And derisively, a lot of alt-right would refer to the conservatives as cock-servatives. A cook being a cuckold, or being an emasculated male, essentially. And we'll leave it at that. All right. So there's this internecine debate, and you see this playing out yesterday, today, tomorrow, in this thing with the Groypers and Turning Point USA. If any of you are paying attention to this, this is very much what's unfolding, and I'll talk about this in a minute for those of you who don't know what Groypers are, and you might just want to remain ignorant. I think some things that just aren't worth knowing, and this is one of them. Now, that's all the good news, and that's the kind of post-Charlottesville good news. And by the way, I wrote an article, a short, simple article about this, that I hope will be used in high schools. And if anyone's interested, I can send it to you, Lisa, and you can have copies of that to kind of see where I was coming from before Charlottesville and this. But I think where we're at now is we're still facing down an extremely dangerous threat in this movement and in its various iterations. It was wounded, certainly, after Charlottesville, but it is still a very real threat. And it's no cliche that when a wild animal is wounded, it's at its most dangerous. And I think that's a big part of what we saw in 2018 and this year. The simple fact of the matter is the dramatic increase in white supremacist terrorist acts was remarkable after Charlottesville. Actual documentable and documented acts of white supremacist terrorism. People being killed. I mean, this is the list, basically, going through just 2018 and 2019 of the documented cases of white supremacist terrorism in this country.
Are these being treated as terrorist entities?
So the federal government, the Justice Department, seems to be more and more inclined to treat them as such. Yes, during some of the earlier parts of this, the DOJ actually, under Trump, stopped treating white supremacist acts of violence as terrorism. But it's, from what I'm hearing, it's coming back to be. You can't ignore it, right? Tree of Life in Synagogue, Christchurch in New Zealand, they can't ignore this anymore. So they are, I think, treating it more and more as domestic terrorism. I think it's fair to say. So some of these are individual murders, some of these are pre-planned massacres, some of these are acts of violence that don't come to fruition, that we're planning on serious acts of violence and murder in various communities around the United States. But this is serious. Let's not pretend for a second there isn't an absolute danger out there of people radicalized, and I mean that in the sense that word from our dealings with Islamic terrorism. These people are every bit as radicalized by the same process online as anybody affiliated with ISIS. They're spending hours online, having their antagonisms, their anxieties, their fears constantly reinforced, constantly exacerbated, and being encouraged to commit violent acts in any of them. If that's not terrorism, I don't know what is. So again, it's not just the acts that come to fruition. There's been other cases where things have been stopped before acts of violence can be committed. So this is a very real threat still. And again, as many jokes as I make about the kind of insanity of all of this, it's still a very real threat to all of us. Again, nothing encapsulates just how global this threat is than the Christchurch massacres in 2 mosques in Christchurch, New Zealand in March 2019 that killed over 50 people. 1 man killed over 50 people. So, I mean, again, this is real. And I think this is the most clear iteration of the reality of this ongoing threat. I'm going to introduce you to 3 other, I think, facets of what's really present today in the alt-right movement, or whatever it is now, because that's part of the debate. Are we still the alt-right, or are we something else? One of the places you still see this stuff is in the realm of ecology, environmentalism, and eco-fascism, as it's often called. There's always been a connection between environmentalism, which we tend to associate with left-wing politics, right? And right-wing, far right-wing politics. The Nazis were tremendously concerned with environmentalism and ecology, right? Because the German Aryan race sprang from this pure ground, right? And that pure ground was the landscape in which white supremacy of the Aryan was molded and protected and extended, right? And so this has continued to be a feature of white supremacist thinking throughout this period. Again, it relates the natural sphere to the racial sphere. You cannot have a pure race unless you have a pure environment for that race to grow, right? In its rooted, particular kind of genetic landscape that they imagine as a thing. So and they tend to think of the ecosystem more broadly than just kind of pathogens and disease and pollution. They also imagine that immigrants are also a parasite or a pathogen or an invasive species that pollutes the environment, right? That pollutes the soil, the literal and figurative soil from which the white race springs. So this stuff is very much rooted in 19th century thinking about blood and soil nationalism. It's exacerbated by climate change. The far right has glommed right onto climate change, and they're great advocates of recognizing the reality of climate change because they're terrified that what's going to happen is, once places in the South Pacific and East Asia start to disappear, millions of these people are going to want to come here, right? And so this animates, as you can imagine, the worst fears of these people. So they're deeply concerned about the environment. But it's not for the reasons you or I might be. This is nowhere, this is really close to home stuff. If any of you were following what's going on down in Bloomington, at the farmer's market down there, there's a woman down there who Schooner's Farm, who you can see here, Schooner Creek Farm, who sells, organic dill and organic tomatoes, and also peddles online some of this vicious alt-right ideology. Right? She's a very active member of this community in Bloomington, and everyone at the farmers market knows it. And this has been an ongoing issue down in Bloomington for weeks and weeks and weeks, all summer long. And so people down there are really actively engaged in this. But it's indicative of this attraction to this eco-fascist kind of mentality that I think you've got to watch out for in the current day iteration of this stuff. Another thing that you may not be less familiar with is the Bronze Age pervert and his book, The Bronze Age Mindset. One of the ways the alt-right got its start online was with its use of this kind of meme-driven kind of politics. That was all about being in the know. It was all about being ironic. It was all about being mysterious. It was all about kind of just being young and male and clever, right? And I think Bronze Age pervert comes out of this. Bronze Age pervert, you can, if you wish, go on Amazon and buy this self-published book. And this book is called Bronze Age Mindset by the whoever, anonymous person, Bronze Age Mindset. Pervert. This is apparently very popular with some of the younger male staffers in the Trump White House. This is documented in a lot of different places that they really love this book. They really embrace this book and the arguments that it's making. If you read it, as I have tried to do, it is bizarre, it is rambling, it is intentionally confusing, it drops, all kinds of syntactical stuff all throughout that make no sense. But I think what's at the core of this is a return really to the kind of meme-oriented esoteric roots of the alt-right that you had to know, right? You had to be clever to really understand what these things were trying to tell you. And I think that's what's going on with Bronze Age pervert. I think it's in part an effort to kind of get beyond the racism of the alt-right, because it puts a lot less emphasis on the racialism of it, the fact that race is at the heart of this. But this is essentially what Bronze Age pervert, I think, is trying to tell us. It's very Nietzschean. There's a lot of talk about the Superman and the Uberman, right? The strong man and the weak man. It's about molding male bodies and male minds into this Bronze Age mindset, right? The notion that in the Bronze Age or in ancient Rome or in ancient Greece, men were strong, men were men. They could feed themselves and their families, and women weren't in the way, causing all these problems about wanting rights and things. Modern life in the mind of the Bronze Age pervert has broken that bond between man and nature. It has made man denatured. It's turned us into weak, effeminate, emasculated, facile creatures. The men I'm talking about now, women obviously are all those things anyway. So what we need to do is adopt this Bronze Age mindset. We need to get back to what it must have been like to be a Bronze Age man, a warrior mentality, homosocial bonding. We've got to embrace culture and place. Where you're from matters immensely, because that's the soil you spring from, right? To get back to that eco-fascist stuff. So it's less about race per se, although let's face it, it's kind of about race. But it's a bit more pagan. It's a bit more pre-religious, right? It's pre-Christian. It's about self-improvement and all this stuff. And there's always been this element to the alt-right. It's always been about, stopping men from being emasculated by feminism, stopping men from being emasculated by women with holy sex and wanting to go out in the workplace and all this stuff. And just being kind of denatured. It's always been there. A Bronze Age pervert and its popularity, it seems, among more esoteric circles, but also in the Trump White House, is indicative of this. What I think it's also indicative of is that I'm not sure what sense it makes anymore to talk about the alt-right, because they're not sure they're still the alt-right. This is in flux. This is a debate that is going on the internet as we speak. These people are trying to find a new way to get to the same place, right, which is white supremacist America, but they're not quite sure how to do it. So a lot of the talk now is about dissident right politics, right? Dissident right, dissident from the establishment right that represents the Republican Party in Congress, especially. So there's a lot of talk about, we're the dissident right. I think they're trying to rebrand, because the alt-right now clearly is a tainted brand. It's outright kind of racist and fascist overtones. What were undertones are now overtones, and they're trying to recover from that. There are a tremendous number of different ways that people think about themselves in this dissident right, as I'll show you in a minute. I'm not going to try and explain any of it. I'm just going to show you the range of ways that people are imagining what's going on. This is unfolding literally as we speak. And it's part of what's going on with this Groyper war, I think. So again, this is just some of the new monikers that people are arguing about on the internet in this kind of post-alt-right milieu. America First, I put that at the top because that's what the Groypers represent. And again, I promise I'll come back to them in a second. But that seems to be gaining a lot of traction, this notion of America First outside of Trump. An America First that really is America First, not just all talk like Trump is, right? We'll come back to them in a minute. But again, you've got traditionalist, neo-reactionary, reactionary, propletarian, new right, white nationalist, paleo-conservative, civic nationalist, on and on. Men going their own way, that's a good one. This is coming out of the men's rights movement and the incel thing. And this is about men just saying, okay, if you're not going to let us be men, then we'll go our own way. And to hell with women.
Where are they going?
Good question. I don't know. And they won't be there for very long, is my guess. It's a good one. Neo-reactionary, this is associated with the Dark Enlightenment, the idea that we ought to go back in time, we ought to recover this ancient pagan past and undo the Enlightenment, undo democracy especially, and return to an authoritarian form of government that can basically put things right. That's another prominent neo-reactionary.
But is this just putting? It's still underneath it all. It's still a racist, sexist mess, right?
Yes.
Okay. You're just putting a new.
But to varying degrees.
Yeah.
Some of these are more racist and more sexist than others, right? And that's what's being played out, right? I think is that some of these men are more committed to racism and racialism than others, and this is where the distinctions start to break down. Some of these people are much more committed to a complete ban on all immigration than others. Some of these are committed to democracy, some are not. Some are fascist, some are not. So there's all kinds of arguments playing out in here. And again, the Groyper War is the key to it all, I think, as I'll show you. Now, so this, if you want to know about the state of the alt-right, today, literally, this is what it is. And again, I can't believe I'm talking about this, right? But it's what's going on. So what's been going on the last few weeks is the so-called Groyper War. The Groyper War. This is Groyper, right? Are you familiar with Pepe the Pig?
Yeah.
So this is Pepe the Pig's cousin, Groyper the Toad, right? And the Groyper is fatter, uglier. He always has this kind of, gait. Where it came from is not entirely clear. It seems to have come from this guy, Nick Fuentes, who you can see on this poster here, who's a very prominent leader of this war that's unfolding. But anyway, this is the Groyper, and this is what I'm going to talk about for the next 5 minutes. And this is what's going on right now, nationally, prominently, as we speak. So what's happening is this. There is a group, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, called Turning Point USA. right? This is a group that shows up on college campuses after 2016. It organizes for Trump eventually, and it wants to kind of out people like me, leftist professors who try and indoctrinate students, right? They do all this kind of politics. But what it emerges as eventually is the biggest group of young conservatives, young Republicans in America. It really becomes the kind of establishment very quickly of the Trump Republican Party and the kind of youth of modern conservatism. And it's extremely well funded. A lot of money's been pumped into this by conservative donors who see it as the future of the Republican Party, right? Because this is where the kids are. So it's good. So these guys, and especially Charlie Kirk, who's been the leader of this, has been incredibly prominent. And they are currently on a culture war tour around the United States on college campuses. They're trying to trigger you, right? They're trying to trigger you snowflakes. They're trying to make you angry. They're trying to recruit to the Turning Point USA, to conservatism. People like Dan Crenshaw, who's a congressman, you'll recognize him with his eye patch. He was a Navy SEAL, was injured in Afghanistan. He's on the tour. Ben Shapiro, who's another prominent conservative, young conservative commentator, who trends towards the kind of righter side of things. He's on this culture war tour, a couple of other people as well. What's happening is, and this is literally going on as we speak, they were at Berkeley last night, they were at Ohio State a couple days ago, and what's happening is gripers are showing up at these events and disrupting them. So what Turning Point imagined would happen is leftists would show up and start crying and trying to shout them down and deplatform them and all the rest of it. But what's actually happening is these so-called gripers, people who are affiliated with this group America First, led by this guy Nick Fuentes, they're showing up at these events and they're asking questions. They're asking questions in an effort to undermine the establishment conservatives that they see TPUSA is representing. So what they're doing is they're showing up and they're talking about, especially Israel. TPUSA, like a lot of conservatives, is firmly behind the state of Israel and Israeli policies towards Palestinians, right? And what a lot of these gripers are doing is showing up and saying, well, why are you giving up American interest to Israel? Which, again, for them is a Jewish country, a Jewish ethno-state at that, right? These people have a really ambivalent view of Israel because on one hand it's Jewish, right, and therefore it's the enemy. But on the other hand, the Jews are the only people in the world, as far as the far right is concerned, that actually got an ethno-state. They've got a Jewish state, right? And it's what they want. They want a white state. So, they kind of see it in somewhat ambivalent terms. But again, they're getting up and they're asking questions. TPUSA and Charlie Kirk are more on the libertarian side of things. So they've come out in favor of not in favor of gay marriage, but not against gay marriage. The state has no business in marriage, so it doesn't matter, is the argument. So of course, what the gripers are doing is pointing that out, that this is not true conservatism. How can you be in favor of gay marriage and homosexuality? They're adopting a very Christian posture, which the alt-right never really did. This is new. Right? The alt-right really eschewed Christianity and it eschewed religion. It was much more kind of pagan than anything. And it didn't really have any truck with organized religion. This new America First movement, the gripers, absolutely put Christianity at the center of it. And American nationalism and Christianity, that's what's at the heart of this, right? And all that racism stuff is definitely still under there, but they're downplaying it. They're not making it the central focus of what's going on. So this is why you saw a couple days ago this tape of Richard Spencer after Charlottesville, right? Did anyone hear this? I'm going to show the text of it. It's awful, it's ugly, it's nasty. But it shows you what Richard Spencer, the great savior of the alt-right, was talking about. Oh, and I'll show you in a minute. Beg your pardon. It's what happened last night. Donald Trump Jr. gave a book talk on his new book, Triggered, at Berkeley, expecting all these Berkeley leftists to come and shout him down. They didn't. It was the Groypers that showed up and gave him hell for his support for Israel. Well, so this is it. Who do you support, right?
I know.
And they know this, Greg. When you read their stuff in the places they hang out, they love this. They love that you're going to cheer for them, right? They know you're not going to
Temporarily.
Yeah, maybe. But they know you're not going to dox and deplatform them because they're doing your work for you, right? And it's really interesting, actually. It's really interesting. If you like that kind of thing, which I do.
Or you wouldn't be in the business that you're in.
Yeah, exactly. So these are some of the memes, and it's really brought them back to the meme or origin of the alt-right. I think they're having a great deal of fun. You know, it's exciting young people again. It's funny. It's kind of esoteric, right? You're in the know if you get what's going on with the Groypers. Now you all do, so you're in the know. You understand these memes. But you know, this is Dan Crenshaw, right? Who's representing TP USA. Israel is the answer. What's more important, Dan? First Amendment free speech or Israel? Dan says Israel every time, right? And the Groypers say wrong. It's free speech, Dan. This is, again, another, so they were at Ohio State October 29th. Today, they're at the University of Florida. When you go home, look up what happened at the University of Florida tonight. And the Groypers will be there. And I'm sure something fascinating happened. Tomorrow, it's North Carolina State. They'll do it again. They're organized. They're disciplined. The whole point of this, if you watch Nick Fuentes' videos, again, I do it so you don't have to. He's very clear that you want to show up well-dressed, well-spoken, clear questions, right, to really undermine these people about Israel, about gay marriage, about immigration. The TPUSA, the conservative establishment, doesn't want to ban immigration entirely, right? We're still letting people in, for instance. These guys want a complete ban, finally, on immigration, like Trump promised. They want a wall, right? So they're pushing them on that. They're pushing them further and further to the right. And that's what's going on. Again, this is what it was all about at the beginning. It was about these memes. And they're back now. And it's invigorating the movement, I think, because this is what it was always all about. So this is, you know, oh, I did it again. This is Nick Fuentes. Yeah, just getting that. Thanks, Matt. Sorry. You shouldn't even put a button like that on the Some professor's not going to press the wrong button. Because all I know how to do is press the wrong button. So anyway, this is, you can see the imagery of this. It's thanks, Matt. It's getting back to the roots of the alt-right. But again, it's different. This is the Spencer quote from just after Charlottesville that was leaked. Actually, it's a recording of a drunken, coked-up statement that Spencer made in the aftermath of Charlottesville. And this is what he said, right? This is a guy who said, I'm not a racist, I don't represent white supremacy, I'm not here trying to create a white-only ethno-state. Well, here he is, drunk and coked up, telling the truth, right? The people who released that statement 2 years later is Milo Yiannopoulos, right? Because Milo is associated with the TPUSA side of this Groyper war. So this is a shot in the Groyper war that is unfolding as we speak, trying to undermine the more racialist-oriented side of the alt-right to protect the TPUSA, traditional and conservative side of the right wing. And it's a war. It really is a fight that's going on out there. And I don't know who's going to throw the next punch. It may have been thrown since we've been studying listening to my nonsense, right? At the University of
Who
Florida.
does he really think that he's speaking to when he says this?
He was speaking to, we think, a drunken gathering of his compatriots, right? A bunch of other alt-right guys.
Oh.
So again, this is a meme from the Groyper side showing everybody exactly where these people, TPUSA folks, are showing up, where they're going to be. Get your tickets, get in line, ask you questions, embarrass them, make them look bad, push them further to the right. And that's what's going on. So what's the Groyper war? Is my advice to you. More broadly, I mean, this is what I think has happened since Charlottesville. We are not out of the woods on this. One of the things the alt-right used to talk about was moving the Overton window, right? Which is a kind of pseudo-political science theory that was never actually published, but we believe a guy named, well, we know Richard Overton wrote a paper that said if you're engaged in political discourse, you can move the window of what's acceptable, right? So there was a time, and you all remember it because it was about 3 years ago, where you didn't really talk about banning immigration, where you didn't really talk about being pro-white, where you didn't really talk about white genocide. If you can push enough people to start talking about that stuff, you move the Overton window, you move the window of what's acceptable political discourse. And that's what they always talked about trying to do. And I think they did it. I really think they did it, because the stuff you hear now in mainstream political discourse on the right, you wouldn't have heard. It would have wound up on Media Matters and you would have seen it there, but you would not have seen some of the more base, appeals to white supremacy that take place. Trump is a perfect example of this, right? Although I don't think he recognizes he is in fact a mouthpiece for anybody other than himself. But he is. And he's mainstreaming a lot of this stuff that I've been talking about. Fox Opinion is another great place to find this. This is yesterday, right? This is Tucker Carlson, who is by far one of the most dangerous men on mainstream television. He's talking about, again, the environment here, talking of eco-fascism. Why would you want a crowded country? If you were truly an environmentalist, why would you want a crowded country? Isn't crowding your country the fastest way to despoil it, to pollute it, to make it somewhere you wouldn't want to live? That's a dog whistle if ever I'd heard one, right? Talking about immigrants coming in, polluting and despoiling and making it a place you wouldn't want to live. This is Laura Ingraham, yesterday on Fox News, talking about the wave of Middle Eastern refugees that Angela Merkel pushed on Europe 4 years ago. The choice we have next election is between preserving our booming economy, our history, our heritage. That, you couldn't have a more clear statement of what's at stake here on the right, or reversing it and repudiating all of that. Mainstream, right? This stuff, the Overton window moved, because you're hearing that on TV and people aren't getting punished for it anymore the way they used to. We've seen a massive increase, as you all know, in hate crimes across this country since 2016. Huffington Post has just put together a database of 800 incidents that they've just calculated of people being told to go back to their own country. And it's a very rich repository of racism, essentially, that they've put together. I think the mainstreaming of conspiracy theories is another way that this stuff got out there and mainstreamed. You wouldn't have known what QAnon was a couple of years ago. Now you know what QAnon is. I mean, well, good. Stay that way, Greg. Talk of Central American caravans, the 3 million illegal voters that voted for Hillary, right, which account for the popular vote. That's a fact. Ukrainian interference in the election. It wasn't Russians, it was Ukraine, the CrowdStrike server, all this nonsense. Mainstreaming just really outlandish theories and conspiracy theories in the mainstream. Again, stuff about it's okay to be white, it's okay to be pro-white, stuff you never would have seen or heard prior to this. And I think the broader context of which this is both a part and a push is the emergent nationalism that is going on all over the world. This isn't just Trump here or Brexit in England. This is Hungary, it's France, it's Brazil, it's India, it's Xi in China. We are trending towards something absolutely catastrophic in our global politics right now that scares me more than anything I've said so far, frankly. I think we're entering a really dangerous era in global history. One I never thought we'd see the likes of again. But here we are. Cheery stuff, ain't it? Yeah. Sorry, holiday. Yeah. I'm going to go home now, have a beer. Go to bed.
Last night I didn't sleep because of climate change, and tonight...
I'm so sorry. But it behooves you to know what's going on, right? Even if it is gripers.
Do all these people that you're talking about, do they know you?
So I'm on a database, race, what am I called? Judas Watch. I'm on Judas Watch.
Yeah,
I'm a race Judas, yeah.
They're Jesus.
A traitor.
Yeah, the worst problem I've had, actually. So I do a lot of op-eds nationally and internationally on this stuff too. And that's what draws really the response. And the Canadians are the worst. I did a Canadian op-ed on the Vancouver Sun. They published a really awful, barely concealed white supremacist op-ed by a diplomat from Canada, who was talking about how Asians were destroying Vancouver. And I'd written a book about how Asians destroyed Vancouver 100 years ago. So I pointed out in this op-ed all the ways this guy was just recapitulating some of the racist diatribes we used 100 years ago. And there is a professor actually in New Brunswick, historical sociology professor, tenured professor, who runs something called the Euro-Canadian Council. Right, you can imagine what that is. It's about protecting Canada from immigrants. And, so he set his goons on me once. And, so every now and then you'll get these emails. What can you do? What am I going to do? I'm lucky because I'm 6 foot tall and a man. Right? This work is hard for women. It really is, and it's hard for anyone who's not white. They bear the brunt. I actually get not nearly the kind of attacks that other people get for having the temerity to speak out and not be white and male. So I feel like this is the least I can do, right?
So I know that I've seen Turning Point USA on campus a couple times in the union, handing out crap. Do you know of any other of these newer groups that are on campus that have organized? Good question.
I mean, Turning Point is one I've seen, but I'm not seeing any of this other stuff. I feel like it's all too in flux and too new. The schism on campus is among the Republicans, as far as I understand it. So you have two GOP and Republican groups, one pro-Trump, one never Trump, that really go at it. I've spoken at the request of their president with the Libertarians on campus, the Young Americans for Freedom group, that's connected at a national level with TUPSA. And, I told them, these people are taking advantage of you, they're exploiting you, they're using you as a conduit to spread this muck, and you need to inoculate yourselves against it. And that's why they invited me to talk to them. So I think on campus, I'm not seeing anything right now. I don't even worry too much about TPUSA. I think it's now, in terms of where we're at right now, a fairly innocuous conservative group. It's the other groups that bother me. But that's just heuristic. I don't know.
You mentioned that you had written something that you might send that to Lisa. I'd be interested in reading that as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Who are the people writing about this topic broadly that you would recommend?
I'll put together a reading list if you want.
Sure.
I'd be happy to do that.
I know Rising Out of Hatred is a pretty solid book by a reformed white nationalist, and Antisocial kind of gets at this in a different way by Andrew Morantz.
The best book, I mean, I'm a historian, right? So Catherine Ballou has written a brilliant book on this. She's written about how the military has been used as a breeding ground and a recruiting ground for this kind of stuff.
Our military?
Yes, our military, yeah. And police forces and things like that, because this is a place to get military training, right? And that's been a big push since the 80s. Yeah, and long before that.
I mean, you're talking big for that.
Yeah.
I don't know what you study history, but military history is a long time now.
And it's a great place to get to basically become paramilitary, right? Through the military.
I feel like I know what a lot of the demographics are of this group, but in terms of age and generational breakdown, because I think traditionally you think of KKK members being older, white, but with the proliferation of 4chan, 8chan, et cetera, all these online platforms and everything, are we seeing these groups skew younger over the last?
So I get in arguments with social scientists about this all the time.
I am a social scientist.
Oh, my God, here we go. Well, you sound like you might be
This is not my era, so.
So a lot of older social scientists who studied the 60s and 70s kind of social movements can't imagine that you can have a group like this that isn't genuinely rooted in the economy, right? So a lot of left-wing social scientists in particular think that the white power of the 70s, 80s, and 90s came out of genuine economic anxiety, genuine crisis of capitalism, right? The people that I think are at the heart of this are middle class, white, very well educated, professionals by and large. We're talking about lawyers, we're talking about, I mean, you look at the college degrees that these guys have, they all went to Duke, Boston University, Yale, Columbia, extremely well educated, extremely privileged, right? They wanted for nothing. A lot of them have come up through the kind of traditional conservative media and conservative activism lines. So yeah, I think this is different. I think this is very different from what you imagine to be the kind of traditional neo-Nazi, working class, dispossessed, alienated, all that kind of stuff. These guys are not them. They're more likely to be making 150 grand in a tech job somewhere than they are to be working on a factory line. Really.
So is this about preserving their power and their privilege?
I think it's genuinely about race. A lot of people explain away racism as really about maintaining economic privilege, right? These guys, I don't think they give a toot. What they care about is the purity, integrity, and continued survival of the white race. They believe this stuff. I genuinely think they believe this stuff on a basic kind of soul level. I think they genuinely think the white race is under threat.
Are there people who also believe there's no such thing as a white race? That's
I assume.
That's what I see sometimes on the internet, that white doesn't exist. And then also I had a friend who was saying that white, as a term that we use it as, it's racist. Which I don't really understand, but there are so many theories of it.
Historically speaking, what constituted white and what didn't has been constantly influenced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Especially in this country. So Irish, Italians, Poles, Southern Europeans, Eastern Europeans have constantly been in this kind of in this liminal space. They may or may not be white.
Mm-hmm.
They've been banned from this country on the basis of their swarthy, inferior kind of racial integrity, right? Americans have to talk about whites because there's so many different ones, right? So Americans couldn't do what the Brits did, which was say we have an Anglo-Saxon racial hierarchy, right? Well, what's Anglo-Saxon is basically Northern European. Well, America ain't just Northern European white people, right? We've got a lot of Italians, a lot of Poles, a lot of Hungarians, a lot of everybody. And so that excludes those people. And this is part of what keeps this stuff in flux and in debate, right? Because you do have people in some of these groups who do believe that we ought to preserve a portion of the white race, but maybe not another. So yeah, Greg, it's we made it up. The thing you've got to remember is we made it up. And if you make something up, then all bets are off, right? Anyone, it can be anything to anybody if you make it up. It's not real. So people can do what they want with it.
You see the rise of nationalism tied with population decline in the West. I mean, a lot of what you see up there, what you presented, is that we want to preserve racial purity of the race, but in all the Western countries you talked about, population decline, and they're in influx. In Germany, especially, they've been for 40 some odd years on a negative trajectory for population. By bringing Turks in, they propped up their economy and kept their population growing.
So
now they're
it's
going, wait a minute, we want to be our nationalistic. And that's in any one of the Western countries with a negative population. We have a constant population growth from immigration, but that's, tethered on what we go in. But
you're right.
The same way.
Demographically, things are changing. And I think that's part of it too, right? The fact of the matter is that in 25, 30 years, this will not be a majority white country. And that's a fact, regardless of what happens. And that is driving a lot of this anxiety, certainly. Europe's a bit different. I mean, it's the same demographic trend, but they've got the population movement in the EU, which has been transformative on a much grander scale than the United States in immigration. But I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, it's part of the anxiety that's behind this.
So that's, I mean, before I came here, I was assuming all these were like, I worked with a lot of working class people and their ideals, and even going back, we would talk about, there used to be rallies in southern Indiana for 100,000 plants.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
In southern Indiana, and that's huge. But to say these were all professionals and degreed and have been through the whole educational process, and that they're looking at this, there's something, they're saying, hey, we gotta preserve what we have.
Yeah.
Or it's gonna change in 25.
I think a lot of that explains people voting for Trump, certainly. But I don't see Trump and the alt-right as coterminous. They overlap, but I don't see them necessarily as coterminous. But yeah, I think, no, you're right, certainly. But I think that, so what the politics that people like that have gravitated towards tend to be populist, nationalist politics that explain all kinds of changes all around the world right now. This is just a particular strand of that, I think, that has gained a lot of attention. Yeah, please.
So as a mother of a 14-year-old boy, other than watching what he does online and talking to him, is there anything else I should be thinking about? And his friends, like what I should be
I mean, that was what I had
keeping them
in mind.
away from.
Yeah, it's what I was thinking about when I started doing this, was how to educate people so they could say to their kids and their relatives, you know, this is, you might think it's funny to share these memes, you might think it's funny to kind of say, oh, I'm pro-white, ha ha ha. But this is a gateway drug to the hard stuff, which is the heroin at the middle of it all, which is the JQ, the 14 words. These are the Pied Pipers, this is where they were trying to get you to, they were trying to lure you to. So I think showing your kid literally that what's at the heart of it, it's not all fun and games, that what's at the heart of it is some brutal, vicious, dangerous ideas, I think is important. Yeah. You can't sit and watch over the shoulders all day long, right?
Have you thought about speaking at the high schools and middle schools?
Yeah, it's hard to get in there.
Why?
Because they're so, these days you know.
They don't want to teach you about slavery.
Yeah. Let's start there. I wanted to get in front of fraternities at Purdue a lot. That was where I really saw and heard was the problem. This stuff was very popular. But I faced a lot
Even there?
roadblocks, yeah.
Just you can tell me if I'm wrong, just from being very online. A lot of people recruit through games, and
Yes.
they talk to them in chat and
Yeah.
everything. And to me, I think a lot of people get you see it a lot in a lot of like leftist YouTube channels or Twitch streamers. They get de-radicalized because they don't ever hear the other side of things. So telling kids about like what they see, like you said, like stuff like this, being exposed to it, knowing about it helps fend off that. And it's not just hovering around them, like letting them know the information.
And it's Discord, and it's not even like, I play Call of Duty, sorry. And it used to be, when I played Call of Duty when it first came out, all of it was like in your headphone.
Mm-hmm.
But now it's all gone onto these other providers, right? Other apps like Discord and Snapchat and all the rest of it. And that's where it happens. It's not nearly as public anymore.
Speaking of
So we gotta get out. The library closes at 8, and we've got to get the room ready. So maybe just a couple more questions.
What about the dark web of these groups? I mean, I've always kind of thought the government had some hand watching over alt-right. I would say alt-right groups are radical groups, but the dark web is providing cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's not even the dark web. I go and look at these sites, and I don't know how to access the dark web, right? But I can access their sites very easily. If anyone ever goes through my office computer, they're going to see a lot of stuff. And all I had to do was Google. Seriously, I mean, it's not hard to find this stuff. It's not hard at all.
Very
Sorry, you had your
interesting. It would be nice to be able to kind of, because I hadn't heard about it since that old stuff, and so much has happened. But I don't want to hear about it more than once every quarter.
Yeah, I'll do it again in 3 months. How's that? Sorry, you had your hand up before.
I was just thinking about because I was kind of processing what you were talking about with like the kids and being exposed and like Discord servers and all these different things, and like how I've had conversations with people who are basically like repeating dog whistles and not realizing
Yeah, not
the
realizing.
extent to it. And like that's what like for me is that's why it's so important to like kind of have deeper conversations, which is really tricky because parenting, it's the whole thing.
Yeah.
But I had a question that came out of that and I have forgotten it now. So yeah.
Well, you know where I am. History department.
Just in general, could you send our like either Lisa or our corporate thing some info about like the eco factors and things like that? Because that's something that I know because Lisa did a really great breakout on climate justice a couple was that yesterday?
Was it yesterday?
Yeah.
Wait,
It's
What was
fine.
yesterday? No, today's Tuesday.
Today's Tuesday.
Okay,
It was a couple days ago. Okay, it's active this time. And one of the things that I've been really noticing from the Bloomington situation, other things is that like this eco-fascist thing is real, right? Like it's a very kind of scary thing that I'm kind of seeing some sort of like the messaging around like population growth, right? That's usually where you first start seeing that kind of thing,
Yes.
like pre-existing. So like I kind of like keep an eye on that really, really much.
Yeah, I'll send a couple of links to you that I monitor and where you can keep up on. Sometimes you got to go to the source though, and it's ugly.
Yeah.
But there's different levels of that too.
I'll preface this. I don't know if there's an answer to this question, but I'm glad that you brought up doxing and deplatforming, and I totally understand that for these high-level individuals where they have a platform. That's what makes them the individuals make movements. When it comes down to the individual level of the foot soldiers, even people that are in our community that have these deplorable views, what is the most, in your opinion, the most effective way to confront that kind of behavior, those kind of thoughts, what they're expressing? Because I would hope that I understand. I don't know, it's a long-winded way of getting this. I understand the value of outing these people and letting their employers know that you have.
Yeah, but you're not going to do that.
But also the goal, I would think, would be to change hearts and minds
Yeah.
and to get people away from these vile things that they are espousing. So I didn't know if you had any thoughts on that.
It's the one question that stumped me for 3 years. Part of that's because I'm like a scholar. It's not my job. I'm being facetious, but
That's why I wanted to preface is like, I don't know if there's an answer.
I think you guys have a much better handle on the answer to that question than I do. I just kind of watch and see and explain. I don't know how to fix it. And I look to you guys to do that. That's a good place to end.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.